People in Wichita had been terrorized by the BTK killer for 30 years.
I looked and saw my mom laying on the bed. You could smell the death.
4 people dying in a house in Wichita, Kansas. That just didn't happen.
The motive behind these killings was more the sexual gratification.
The volcano was finally starting to erupt.
The demands that those investigators felt when lead after lead led them nowhere.
3 months after the Otero murder came Catherine Bright.
There's the dark side of me, the secret.
Dennis Rader had aspired to become a serial killer, and with these murders, he had become BTK. When Dennis Rader, the serial killer known as BTK, started corresponding with me, one of the first things he said was that I should take a drive into the countryside around Wichita. He grew up on farms, and he wanted me to look at the barns and silos. They might look ordinary, but those were the places he had his first torture fantasies. He had this fantasy of he was going to build this silo of terror. And so he drew it. And inside were things like the wheel of death, where he would chain a victim to it. And there was a train along with a railroad track, because his fantasy was to tie girls to the track and have the train run over them. When did you think of a barn for the elaborate torture devices?
Back in grade school. That's when it first started. It happened when we were playing cowboys and Indians. We would tie each other up in a silo, and I got sexually excited when I was either tied up, or even better, when somebody else was tied up. Later on, I came up with my sexual fantasies about the silos.
One of the things that we know about sexually compelled serial killers like Dennis Rader is that they often have generated a fantasy life that's very vivid to them, usually starts quite young. Studying that would show me what motivates them to want to kill someone, but also to actually cross the line and do it.
Well, good morning.
Hello, Dennis. I'm Dr. Catherine Ramsland, professor of forensic psychology and the author of multiple books about extreme offenders like serial killers. I've been corresponding with Dennis Rader to try to understand what led him to become one of the most notorious serial killers in America. This is the first time that Rader has explored these topics in depth with anyone.
People call me a monster. I guess I am sort of a monster.
The more information we have about serial killers, the more we understand what makes them tick, the easier it will be to prevent them. My goal with Dennis Rader is to use his story to dissolve some of the stereotypes about serial killers so that we can better identify children who might be at risk for becoming adult offenders. To do that, we need to understand what motivates someone like Dennis Rader. So we need to look at their development, their fantasy life, and their crimes to understand it. By the fall of 1974, Rader had killed the Oteros, murdered Catherine Bright, attempted to kill her brother. And Rader has been going about business as usual as a young husband and a student taking classes at Wichita State.
Initially, the Bright murder was not associated with the Otero killings. There were not a lot of similarities in the method of killing. The strangulation that was used at the Otero house was different than what you found where Kathy was stabbed, and that's what resulted in her death.
At the crime scene at the Oteros, the telephone line was cut, and there had not been a sign of a struggle. And at the Bright scene, of course, there was a struggle as Kevin fought back, and they turned furniture over. And the phone in the bedroom had been unplugged, but Catherine Bright was found clutching a telephone receiver in her hand. She just wasn't able to make the call.
Because Catherine Bright's brother didn't die, he was able to give the police a little sketch.
Did you pay attention to the news coverage afterward?
Oh, yeah, very close. We paid a lot of attention to the newspapers and listen to the news and anything, any tips. They had a fairly good description of me that he gave to the police. I looked at that and I said, whoa, that's pretty close to the way I look.
One of the things Rader said to me was that he always had bad luck with his crimes because something always seemed to go wrong. And he always felt as if he were the victim. And it's because he sees his world from his point of view and no one else matters. Clearly, he has not thought of his victims as human beings at all. They belong to him and they're supposed to behave according to his fantasies. And when they don't, he's the victim in his mind.
After the Otero case and the Catherine Bright case, the newspaper makes a report that there were some people that had been arrested that were indicating they might have been involved in the Otero killings.
The one thing BTK likes more than anything else is publicity. So when suspects were in custody, not Dennis Rader, Rader was not happy about that. So Rader is thinking about, wait, I'm the guy. Where's the headline? I want to see the headline. And that ticked him off.
In October of 1974, a prominent newspaperman for the Wichita Eagle and Beacon received an anonymous telephone call telling him that there was a letter related to the Otero case on the second floor of the public library in an engineering textbook. Detective Bernie Drwatsky was assigned to go look for the letter, and he did find that. The letter started out with, I did this, I did it myself, I did it alone, so let's set this straight. And then he goes into a recitation of all four of the victims, what position they were found in, how they were killed, the types of bindings that were used, the types of knots that were used. Whoever wrote that had intimate knowledge of the crime scene or had committed the crime. At the end of the letter, he mentioned that the code words for me will be bind them, torture them, kill them. BTK.
What gave you that idea that you should have a name, and how did you come up with it?
I've been reading books like The Boston Strangler, and basically I did bind the people.
But other killers didn't name themselves.
No, they're picked up by the media or the police. But I thought I'd be a little different. I'd go ahead and name my own name and be done with it.
One of the things that motivates Dennis Rader a lot is the need for attention. He wanted to be considered special. And other serial killers, he saw them as being famous. So I think he named himself because he saw the way those names generated attention, and he wanted to terrorize Wichita.
The letter in 1974 indicated that he intended to continue to kill. He said that he was occupied by a monster. He doesn't know what the monster is going to do, and that BTK doesn't have a choice in the victims, that the monster picks the victims. The decision was made by the command at that time. The letter should not be shared to the public because it was work product of the investigation.
The Eagle withheld the information from the public at the request of police and did not publicize that there was a serial killer. And, police had convinced editors at the paper at that time in the 70s that it was, you don't want to panic the public.
I had a tape recorder at that time, and I kept telling the tape recorder, why did I do this? What caused this? And I think that I finally figured out what I call the Factor X made me do that.
When Dennis is trying to talk about Factor X, he's saying, here's the big mystery. What is it that motivates me?
Factor X was kind of what one would consider to be the evil part of him. He was constantly daydreaming about how he can use sex to control others.
Factor X is an overall drive. Even today, If I see something on TV or a picture or start thinking about the old times and fantasy, I still get that feeling, that sexual feeling. I really do. I can't, it's just still there.
He wants to say there's a factor X that's alive in me that will have its way, and there's not a lot I can do about that, as a way to slip responsibility for the decisions he made and the actions he took. Because it makes him seem larger than he actually is. If we can't figure him out, he's a much bigger person. But if he can be reduced to reasons for why he did it, he's no longer special.
I blamed it on the factor X. Just didn't all of a sudden decide, whoa, I'm going to go kill the Otero. And just building, it built to it, kind of like a volcano.
When do you think that started for you?
It started all the way when I was young.
Let me take you back to your childhood. You haven't talked very much, even to me, about your father and your sense of your father.
Just a minute, I'll be right back.
Okay.
Oh, there's lunch.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Don't worry about it.
What do you have?
Bologna. They kind of warmed it up a little bit. I got some scrambled eggs and I got a biscuit and some oil.
Dennis Rader thinks of himself as a good person who did some bad things. I don't buy that. But he certainly lives in an ordinary way most of the time. If anyone wanted to have an association with him, you have to talk about ordinary things that really aren't about serial murder. Well, feel free to eat while you're talking if you think you can do both. I don't want you to waste that. So let's go back to your childhood.
My dad was sort of my hero.
Okay.
He was a really good male model. He took us fishing, taught us how to hunt. He worked 2 jobs, moonlighting, and he was just a busy man.
Would you say you were close to him growing up then?
Yeah, I was closer probably him to Mom, but they were both good parents.
The common perception of a serial killer's childhood is that they inevitably have endured some form of physical, sexual, or verbal abuse, and pretty serious abuse. And we need to recognize that we're wrong about that, and we need to stretch our concept to accommodate somebody who didn't have child abuse. Dennis Rader was born in a small town in southeastern Kansas. Both grandparents had farms. There was prayer, Bible reading. It seemed as if he had basically an all-American boyhood. But Rader didn't mature beyond the childhood need for attention. And one of the things we do see in serial killers, especially those who have this psychopathic kind of nature, is an arrested development. While he matured in other ways, this need for attention remained very infantile. When Rader was a boy, there was an incident that happened that he thinks of as a formative event.
My mom, she was vacuuming the living room, and under one of the sofas, she got the ring caught in one of the springs, and she couldn't reach it with her other hand because she was hurting, so she asked me to go for help. That image of her being in terror and kind of held is prolonged me into one of my dark side.
The expression on his mother's face was a part of Factor X. Watching his mother, who is typically in a more powerful position, be utterly helpless translates through his development later to be, that's the expression I want on the face of my victims.
As a child, there was a big progression in his sexual fantasy life that slowly escalated and became increasingly more deviant.
I did start to abuse farm cats. I built a box and I cut out the top of it just for a cat head. And then I'd get some milk. I'd wait till one would get in there, and I'd pull the string, and the box would drop over, so it sticks its head up through the hole, and I had a noose for it.
I never knew that. Why did you like hanging cats?
There was some sexual excitement there to see them hung.
He did admit that he had tortured cats when he was younger, and it seems that a lot of the serial killers prefer cats. What they will tell you is that it sounds like a female in distress when you torture a cat.
Why does he not see the immorality of his treatment, but also why does he relish it? He loved utter helplessness and desperation and needing him to decide to let them go. It would certainly be a training ground for what is coming for him in the future.
At a young age, one of the things he was really fixated with was bondage. And it led to his actually experimenting on himself.
My fifth grade teacher, she was a real dominating female, and she used to pick on weaklings like me. Well, anyway, she became my first fantasy victim. I would sneak out and do some window peeking, and so I'd catch her occasionally in her bedroom. That's where I had my first sexual outlet, and it wasn't normal because it wasn't with a female. It was me tying myself up in a hedgerow against a fence, and I had this weird feeling. And whoa, what was this? What happened? To create that again, I had to use bondage.
The rope has already become an arousal mechanism. Peeping on people has been something that has made him feel powerful. Now we put it together with a woman he wants to have power over quite specifically, and he ejaculates. This cements the paraphilia. A paraphilia is a trigger to arousal that is considered to be deviant, sometimes to the point where they can't get aroused in a normal way at all.
Over time, you start to need more to stimulate yourself, more to get excited. And the fantasy started to escalate even further to his wanting to carry it out on others.
We see these childhood fantasies come full circle in the Otero murders, where all 4 victims were tied up, strangled, or hanged like the cats. And he replicated in his victims the look of helplessness he'd seen on his mother's face when her hand was stuck in the sofa.
When Chief Lemunian took over the department in 1976, BTK really wasn't on anybody's immediate radar, because after 1974, we did not hear from BTK for about 2.5 years. At that point, that is enough time to go by that some of us speculated that perhaps he was in prison or he had been killed.
What authorities didn't know is that Rader was starting a family in the Park City suburb of Wichita. Dennis and his wife had their first child in 1975. Rader had gotten a job from a security company. In a way, it was like the perfect job.
Dennis was one of the supervisors who would come out and supervise the installation. I mean, how ironic is that?
Working at a security company enhanced his predatory activities. He developed more skills and understanding of how to enter a home and how to get past a security system.
I used to like to go to people's closets, mess around in their Chester drawers and stuff, and find nylon socks and panties and things of that nature. I would steal them. That was kind of exciting.
So no one ever caught you or complained that things were missing?
No, I was real careful.
While Rader's wife was home taking care of their newborn, he began to act on his fantasies again, and his new job allowed him to troll for victims.
He was always looking for victims, and he was always monitoring his victims' activities. He called them projects. And one of the things he kept repeating to me throughout the time I spent with him is, if you become my project and you have a routine, you're in trouble.
Once you knew who you were going to target, what did that feel like to you?
Well, it's kind of like the big game hunter, I guess you'd say. He's got the target, or he's got the animal in his sights and his gun. This is going to be it.
What made you so sick, you son of a bitch?
This is the neighborhood where Dennis Rader would roam around looking at the homes, going backyards, being a voyeur, looking for what he called projects. And what he really liked about this neighborhood was this was close to the interstate, where it was a quick getaway. For Rader, a project is an incident that Rader has planned where he has targeted a person against which he's going to commit a crime. He began to name them, like someone playing the piano was Project Piano. So whenever he wanted to think about a project, he had a label.
I think it just popped in my head one day. I had to come up with some kind of nickname. A lot of times you'll see them name on a boat, or the oil men, they always name their oil wells.
When we sort of back up on this and look at it psychologically, he's dehumanizing people. He can distance himself from them and what he's going to do with them. Any pain they feel, any loss to other people is of no consequence to him because they're projects. On March 17th, 1977, almost 3 years after he killed Catherine Bright, the pressure from his fantasies had been building, and Rader was ready to kill again. Rader had his eye on several different projects, potential projects. He dressed up in tweed and, nice shoes and a briefcase, which was his James Bond outfit because he liked to think of himself as a spy. When he came to the first project, Project Green, he knocked on the door and no one answered. And so he figured if one project didn't work out, there was another one down the street that he could try as well. He was dressed to kill. This is what he had in mind.
I was all geared up to do something, and it didn't happen at Project Green, where the girls were home. But I think I went to a couple other houses, knocked on the door. So I was in the mood.
Rader then moved on to a different project, Project Blackout, and again, no results. He did not want to let this day get wasted in his mind, and so he saw a little boy, and he thought if there's a little boy here, he must have a mother at home.
So that was random, but the opportunity struck, and I already had the plan what I was going to do, and there was the opportunity, so I latched onto it.
In my mind, I was 5, but I was 6 years old. Just turned 6. My mom, she was sick in bed. Sent me block up the road for a can of soup, And on my way back, man stops me, shows me a picture, woman and child. Asked me, did I know who it was? No, sir, I don't. About 15 minutes later, come knocking on our door. Opened it. There stood the same man. He pushed me out of the way, proceeded to come on in, pulled down the blind, turned off the TV, reaches under, pulls out a gun. Well, from that point, he locked us in the bathroom, put his kids in there, put a blanket, a couple toys in there. Pushed the bed against the other door. There was a crack in the door, just enough where you can see out. I was looking through the door. Seen her tape her hands and her feet behind her back. And plastic bag over her head, rope tied around her neck, laying face down. He left. I was ramming the bathroom door. I finally broke a hole in it. We got out. I ran around to Mom. Just a second. It's a image burned in my brain. It'll never go away.
Anytime you have a survivor who was approached by an offender, you do learn more about his MO, his approach, whether he was persistent or not, what kinds of things did he say, how did he pass himself off. Shirley had told the kids to calm down because she did not know she was in for murder that day. She might have said to the kid, keep screaming, the neighbors might hear you. She might have said that, except that he calmed her and assured her, if you just do what I say, it'll be over and I'll leave.
Dennis Rader was an unforgiving, unrelenting madman. And Steve, I've always felt very bad for him for what happened to him, because BTK just didn't kill his mother. BTK really killed him too.
My memory of my mom took over everything for a while. I didn't care what happened, didn't care where I went, didn't care if I died. Still sometimes I wished I died.
At Shirley Bayan's home, there's no empathy whatsoever for the kids or even seeing them as human beings. Rader has a wife and a child at home, and yet he doesn't seem to have the same feelings about what these kids are going through as they're watching through this crack in the door as he's killing their mother. Having the children there in Shirley Bayan's house, did that bother you at all?
No, my objective was to her. Kind of like a World War II, you're flying a bomber, and you've got enemy aircraft shooting you down, but your main focus is to drop the bombs on what they want you to drop the bombs on. Nothing else mattered. She was my focus.
Weren't you worried about what might happen with them?
No. They were old enough to take care of themselves.
Rader was barely even aware of them, which is exactly how the brain of a psychopath works. They're very goal-oriented, and they're just going to keep going until they achieve it.
After the Bayan murder, BTK was back on the radar of a number of people at WPD. Some officers speculated that Shirley Bayan was a BTK victim because of the way she was tied. She was actually tied to the bed, not just tied up and placed on the bed. And there was some semen found in the immediate area of her body. Most of the cases, there was semen discovered either on or near the bodies, but it was not a rape. It wasn't discovered in the bodies.
I never raped a girl.
Just one of those things I just didn't do. Felt it was just a little bit too far.
I think even serial killers probably have some kind of taboo. Yeah, that was mine. I would not rape a female.
There's an odd thing about Dennis Rader in that he never seems to recognize that murder is the worst thing you can do. So when he talks about rape being too far, it's absurd. Because in his fantasies, he did rape them.
Shirley was found with a bag over her head, and the fact that the bag was tied shut with a nightgown just seemed to ring of BTK.
There were formal knots used, not just someone just making loops in a rope until it was secure. When you start looking at the symmetry of the tying and bindings, that's when the bizarre flavor of the sadomasochistic interaction with the victims was there. The bindings were not just for security, but they were for bondage gratification as well.
I use clove hitches on hands or on feet. Those are very hard knots to get undone. Basically, once that knot comes to its peak, there's no way you can get out of that. So that was probably my favorite knot, but the other one was tie a knot on the end of the line and make a slip knot.
Dennis Rader often experimented with different forms of binding and knots that allowed them to make certain movements or restrict them further. It's a part of the paraphilia. That was the feeling of power and control. And that was also a part of the fantasy.
Dennis Rader would take artifacts, like a lot of serial killers do, from the crime scenes, and he would take items from his victims to dress in and to use as articles in his autoerotic activities.
We had a pretty good feeling that if we find this guy, there'll be no doubt, because we'll find all his collection of things that he's stolen from these poor victims.
Do you ever think when you're in that cell about the possibility that you could one day face a firing squad? They don't have firing squads in Colorado, and I don't think that in any...
Rader idolized other serial killers and craved the recognition and attention they received. He wanted to be acknowledged as being like them. But Rader worried that Shirley Bayan's kids had seen him. He wanted recognition for this crime, but he wanted to see what would happen. So he didn't immediately communicate with police or the media. How long had you been studying other serial killers?
Well, it started about when I was about 14. And I think part of it come from a guy in California who took pictures of the models.
Harvey Glattman, yeah.
That was pretty exciting to me.
Glattman was a serial killer from the 50s, known as the Lonely Heart Killer. He posed as a professional photographer in California, Los Angeles, and he would lure his victims by promising them that he could open the doors for a modeling career or profession. And he would get more sinister and the types of pictures he would take. So pictures of them in certain types of bondage, and eventually he'd take control of them. And in the pictures, you can see the female's reaction to the fear.
Rader wanted to replicate that expression in his victims, where they would look at him, recognize his complete power and control over them, because it would make him feel dominant and powerful. Serial killers tend to keep killing, but after the murder of Shirley Bayan, Rader would go quiet again, but only until he spotted the perfect victim. It's December of 1977. Rader has murdered 6 people. He's gotten away with it. He's feeling cocky. He's made mistakes. He's had close calls. He wants the next one to be just right. When he came to this street, he saw a young woman outside who fit exactly what he was looking for. She was petite, young, blonde, Nancy Fox. He stalked her. He went to where she worked. He wanted to get her routine so he knew when she'd be home and when she wouldn't.
She'd taken a second job during the Christmas season, and that was at the mall. We'd go in and act like he was going to buy something, looking for gifts just to interact with her.
On December 8th, 1977, 9 months after the murder of Shirley Bayan, Dennis Rader came to Nancy Fox's house for the final time.
He had already broken in and was sitting inside when she walked through the door. When she realized he was sitting there, and she says, "What do you want?" And he told her that he always used the word strange dude. "I'm a strange dude, gonna do some stuff with you. If you cooperate, you'll be okay."
She was upset, but he let her have a cigarette. They sat and talked for a while. At one point, she then said, "Let's get this over with so I can call the police."
He learned that he needed to take control quickly, so he took her to the bedroom.
At this point, he begins to mentally torture her so that he can capture that terror on her face in exactly the way his adolescent fantasy had formed. You enjoyed the look of fear on your victim's face?
Well, yes, it's sort of a sexual arousement with Fox. Things went pretty smooth and everything, and although her face was down, it's just the idea that I had done it is all I needed. It's like my mom when her finger was caught in the couch. She was struggling.
As he was sitting astraddle of her, he leaned over and whispered in her ear, "I'm BTK, I'm a bad dude." That was the second scene where DNA was found, or the seminal stains that were eventually used for DNA, was on one of her nightgowns that was on the head of her bed.
After the incident, then I had time to quickly go through some of her stuff, and I took some of her nicer clothes, or slips and stockings and things of that nature, my tokens.
When he was telling us the story about killing Nancy Fox, he recalled with specificity the details of the murder, her pleas and her words and her fear. This man committed these things to memory, and he lived these things day after day in his fantasy world. Although he looked normal on the outside, it just gives you a glimpse of the monster that was living inside him.
Here I go home, and my wife's there, so I had to make up a story why it was running a little late. We were having car trouble at that time, so I just blamed it on the car.
With Nancy Fox having been in the house and seeing how very small it was very clear that he had picked a place where he could easily keep total control over the situation, because his ultimate goal was to get her to the point where she felt helpless, and there was no place for her to go, and that way he could enjoy his ultimate fantasy.
Rader said Nancy Fox was his favorite case because everything went the way he had orchestrated it.
Now he wanted some acknowledgement that BTK had killed again. So he called it in and listened for the news. Because this is his special murder, he wants something associated with it that he can cut out of the newspaper and keep as a token.
On a cold morning in December of 1977, the police dispatcher received an anonymous call.
Dispatcher? Yes, you will find a homicide at 843 South Pershing.
We have a homicide that occurred here at 843 South Pershing. We received a call about 8:20 from an individual that said there's a homicide and hung up the phone. And officers came out and we have checked, and we do have a young lady that is a victim of a homicide.
Was she shot or stabbed?
No, she appears to have been strangled this time.
The officers that I knew thought it was pretty arrogant of the killer to call.
Well, when I made the phone call about Fox thing had already happened, and there was nothing about it. And that's probably kind of like a cat and mouse thing. I went ahead and used the phone. Stupid. I was so afraid that someone would ID that and say, well, I know that voice. Well, that's Dennis Rader.
He made the call that had put him at risk in ways he hadn't anticipated. There were definitely times when he expected to be caught, yet when he went uncaught, it just confirms for him there must be something special about him, and it must be because he's smarter than the police.
He said that was the stupidest thing he ever did, was make that phone call, because now there was a vocal footprint of him that could give him away.
It's been over 3 years since he left the letter at the library about the Otero murders, and now he's craving publicity. And he'd murdered twice more. But police still haven't revealed there's a serial killer in Wichita. This keeps them in control of the narrative and drives BTK to the media.
I was on duty at Cake as the chief photographer. The receptionist out front called back, and I took the call, and she said, you know, I have an odd letter here. So took a look at it, and it was a letter talking about Nancy Fox, detailing several different things, but the chilling moment in that letter was the line, how many people do I have to kill before I get my name in the paper? BTK.
Executive producer Ron Lewin received the letter. He's with us today to give us the information. Ron?
Jack, the communication came in the form of a 2-page typewritten letter addressed to KAKE Channel 10. It was signed with the initials BTK. BTK claims to have strangled a total of 7 people, mostly women. He provided a list of his victims, beginning with the number 5.
During the newscast, the police chief walks into the studio, takes his seat, and we cut to Lemunion, and Lemunion picks up the story.
BTK has killed 7 people, Chief. What kind of leads do you have?
Well, very honestly, we have no solid leads at all. We have general leads, we have circumstantial evidence, we have absolutely nothing that will point us to any one particular individual.
Chief Lemunion made the decision that, in fairness to the public, he needed to warn them that there was a serial killer afoot in Wichita after all.
This guy is in our community, and he's killing our people.
When they finally announced that there was a serial killer on the loose in Wichita, what was that like for you?
That was a pretty big buzz, really. I mean, that's not saying this good, but wow, they finally recognized me, you know, I felt kind of cocky at that time, I guess you would say.
Dennis Rader loved the idea that he was a serial killer. It was the hottest aspect of his identity. And his need for attention would ultimately be his downfall.
The most important thing that everyone can do is certainly be aware that we do have a very serious problem.
That was like an atomic bomb going off in the city.
The whole city was turned upside down. There were 200,000 people here. It changed the lives of 200,000 people.
You're dealing with a person who is perverted, a person that is sick.
People were just terrified. Question for Wichita back then is how many more people are going to die?
People were frightened.
That person is going to kill again.
When she turned to check on the baby, he pounced on her.
There were a number of other young women who he was going to murder.
People were pretty close to meeting the hand of death.
The sexual arousal started to escalate.
Rader really enjoyed this game with law enforcement.
taunting police. Who was going to be the next victim?
All of a sudden, BTK is back.
And let them people know that I'm still around.
Dennis Rader has gotten away with this for 30 years.
Eventually, he would slip up. I said, we're going to get this guy. I don't care what it takes.
I couldn't figure out how they knew.
Brand nigga from the 9-1. Switch that over, that's the young blonde. I was at the West Coast, now I'm in the East Coast. Saw you when I